How's it going, everybody? My name is Noah Holly, and welcome back to another episode of the Pride Report. It is episode 29, and today's show is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. I'm going to be mainly focusing on my latest bracketology today instead of recaps and previews. I'm on a little bit of a time crunch today, but I really wanted to talk about my latest bracket and break that down because it's been so long since I've done that. So I figured that I would put the recaps and the previews and the other segments off for today and just focus on that. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Before we begin with the bracket talk, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing last night's headliner, which of course was Oklahoma and Kansas. And one of the more shocking results of the Big 12 slate, the Jayhawks hammered the Sooners 104-74. Every single starter plus Silvio De Souza scored in double figures for a Kansas team that will surely be riding high coming into Lubbock on Saturday. Oklahoma, on the other hand, dropped their sixth consecutive game to fall to 16-11 on the season. The Sooners find themselves barely off the bubble after being a unanimous top seed just weeks ago. If they continue down this path, there's a good chance that they will miss the NCAA tournament, which would make for one of the more epic collapses in college basketball history. And even if Oklahoma does make the tournament, I doubt that they're going to make it past the first round. Their defense is absolutely putrid, and their attack is far from potent when Trae Young isn't knocking down shots, and the Sooners as a whole are struggling from deep. Alright, now let's get into the real fun and run through my latest bracketology update. Let's start with the top seeds. Virginia and Villanova remain obvious choices for the top two overall seeds. As of now, not a single bracket on the Matrix has either of these teams off the top line, and few brackets have Xavier and Kansas failing to receive a top seed either, especially after the Jayhawks' dominant win over Oklahoma last night. Now let's take a look at the 2 line. Duke is the safest 2 seed at the moment. Even after Auburn's loss to South Carolina on Saturday, I kept them here. I understand why people would have them as a 3 seed. However, they have wins over good teams, but barely any wins over great teams. Michigan State moves up a line. I seriously contemplated keeping them on the 3 line. I recognize that the Spartans are arguably a top 3 college basketball team right now, but I'm not sure how deserving they are of a top seed. Other than marquee wins over 2 very good teams in Purdue and North Carolina, Michigan State has no wins over current at-large qualifiers. And North Carolina earns the final 2 seed. As of recording, the bracket matrix disagrees with me here. As you can see, Purdue has a slight lead over the Tar Heels for the final spot on the 2 line. But I think UNC makes more sense here. They have 2 more losses than Purdue, but they have a tougher strength of schedule, a tougher out-of-conference strength of schedule, a higher overall RPI, a higher out-of-conference RPI, more Quadrant 1 wins, and significantly better out-of-conference wins, as well as the same amount of losses to 100-plus RPI teams. Plus, if the regular season ended today, North Carolina would be the hottest team in the country, while Purdue would have lost 3 of its past 4. To me, UNC makes the stronger case at the moment. Let's talk about the 3 and 4 seeds, and then we'll focus more on the bubble and specific resumes that I want to talk about today. Purdue, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, and Clemson round out the 3 line, while Arizona, Tennessee, Gonzaga, and Wichita State round out the 4 line. If you follow my bracket, you may be surprised to see Wichita State here, as I've consistently had them lower than average all season long. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Shockers resume, and I don't know if I consider them a potential second weekend team. But wins over extremely good Cincinnati and Houston teams, as well as a consistently high standing on major ranking sites, make them a better 4-seed candidate than anyone on the considerably weak 5 line. You could make a case for Ohio State, but honestly, I'm just going to have to give the edge to the Shockers. All right, now let's take a look at the bubble. Here is the first half of the last 8 byes. Butler and Virginia Tech are safely in the field for now. I would say the same about Providence. Even though I don't think the Friars necessarily passed the eye test, but you still can't ignore the wins over Villanova and Xavier. St. Mary's is another interesting case. I have no idea how the committee will handle the Gales. This is a good team, but for Pete's sake, look at their resume. It is brutal. They have more bad losses than they have Quadrant 1 wins. NC State, Texas, Baylor, and UCLA round out my last 4 byes. NC State has the best wins of any bubble team right now. Texas has good wins as well, and I think Baylor's win over Texas Tech over the weekend locked them into the field for now. And as for Kansas State, I decided to keep the Wildcats as the last bye after flip-flopping between them and UCLA this morning. It's an extremely close call, but Kansas State, for the most part, has avoided bad losses, while the Bruins have quite a few of those. Now let's take a look at the last four in: UCLA, Miami, Louisville, and LSU. You may be surprised to see Miami and LSU here. Let's talk about Miami first. Here's a look at their full resume. I will give it to them. Their RPI is considerably better than other bubble teams, but they really haven't beaten anybody. If it weren't for the quadrant system, the Hurricanes would be in the next four out. As you can see, they have 4 Quadrant 1 wins, but over Middle Tennessee, Virginia Tech, NC State, and Notre Dame, I think that's enough to keep them in, but definitely not enough to have them on the 8 or 9 line, where a good portion of bracketologists had them as of last night. And now for LSU, the Tigers are on just 12 brackets right now, which is pretty surprising considering that LSU has 7 Quadrant 1 wins compared to the combined 10 of Louisville, Syracuse, and St. Bonaventure, who appear on 55, 80, and 70 brackets, respectively. Now let's take a look at LSU's full resume. I think LSU has a similar case as Providence and Texas. Like the Friars and the Longhorns, LSU is not a great team, and they have a high amount of losses, but the wins are too good and too plentiful to ignore. Now let's talk about St. Bonaventure and Louisville, my last team in and first team out, respectively. Now the resumes of these teams could not be any more different. Louisville, on one hand, has the talent of an 8 or 9 seed, but a terrible resume that includes only 2 Quadrant 1 wins over mediocre teams. St. Bonaventure, on the other hand, is arguably the worst at-large team in my projections, but they have 5 Quadrant 1 wins and a great win over Rhode Island. I ended up choosing St. Bonaventure, but this is seriously a toss-up. You could go the St. Mary's route and put Louisville in despite their terrible resume, but St. Mary's is a top 20 team across the board in every major rating system. Louisville's in the mid-30s. St. Mary's has a road win over Gonzaga, and Louisville's best win is on the road versus Florida State. So technically very different cases. Once again, I don't like St. Bonaventure, but you seriously cannot put Louisville in right now. So I have to give it to the Bonnies for the last team in. That is actually going to do it for today's show. It was a little bit shorter than normal, but nevertheless, I hope that you enjoyed. Do not worry, recaps and mid-major outlooks will return tomorrow. Tomorrow is actually going to be a huge mid-major episode. I'm going to try and talk about 3 or 4 different conferences in an effort to catch up on that series. For now, however, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I'm out. I'll see you guys tomorrow.